One of the things we get asked a lot often is what's better, forefoot striking or heel striking, and does it even matter? And that's what we're going to be diving in today, and I'm going to hand you over to Lindsay, who will get us started.
So let's unpack what is the difference between forefoot striking and heel striking. Essentially, the description of the name is pretty accurate. When we talk about forefoot striking though, what we are essentially meaning is people that land on the middle to front of the foot and then the heel comes down. So understand that even quite neutral, what are considered neutral runners who run with a forefoot strike will compress the heel of the shoe, loading the Achilles tendon before pushing off. Okay, so there's always going to be some involvement of the heel, and that's often why even in forefoot strikers you will see that there is wearing of the heel at the back of the shoe, but the initial impact comes middle to front of the foot, and therefore the part of the body's natural shock absorption system comes into play, and that is one of the reasons why people tend to think forefoot striking is better than heel striking, but we're going to unpack that a little bit later in the video. Heel striking, exactly as it states, is when we come down on the heel first. Now, people who tend to slightly pronate and people who supinate are generally heel strikers. They come down on the outside of the back of the foot. Most people will then roll slightly towards the middle of the foot and off the big toe. And that mild pronation would then be considered a neutral running gait, and some people will stay on the outside of the foot, and those are people that would be considered supinators and will wear the outside of the running shoe. So that is the difference between heel striking and forefoot to midfoot striking.
So often we've got to wonder, do the shoes that you run in actually matter? So does the type of shoe affect your foot strike? And can you, if you're running in racing flats or you're running in big training shoes, do they affect how your foot impacts the ground? So in looking through, there's a lot of research that's actually been done looking at the differences in shoes and how they can impact your running form. And the two main things that have been looked at are the midsole thickness. So if you think about minimalist shoes like you had in the past, all these big chunky shoes now we have with the 14 mil soles, like with the carbon rod shoes, and the weight of the shoe itself, does it actually matter? So what they've actually found is that the lightest shoes almost make no difference, and as the shoes get heavier, you actually shift more towards a slight midfoot strike, and the reason for this might be to reduce the vertical ground reaction forces. Now that doesn't actually matter very much for us. It's just to say that as the shoe gets heavy, you'll be impacting the ground a little bit harder, and you switch to a midfoot strike just to ease off that pressure a little bit. And the other side is of course the thickness of the sole. And what they found here is that the main difference is actually comparing barefoot running versus what's called shod running. So if you're barefoot, you will tend to almost always strike on your forefoot and not heel strike. But as soon as you have any kind of protection underneath your foot, we all just naturally tend towards more of a midfoot and a rear foot strike. So in that sense, the difference is no shoes or shoes. And as the midsole thickness actually goes up, it makes very little difference in terms of whether you are a midfoot striker or a forefoot striker. Habitual forefoot strikers will continue to forefoot strike regardless of what they wear, and habitual rearfoot strikers will also continue to rearfoot strike according to what they wear, but the weight of the shoe does tend to shift rear foot strikers slightly onto their midfoot as the shoe gets heavier.
I think the question always has to come down to you know, when we're talking about rear foot striking or forefoot striking, is to, you know, why do people want to really change this? A lot of the sort of stuff that we read is like, oh well, you're going to become a better runner, you're going to become a more efficient runner if you forefoot strike as opposed to rear foot striking. That's questionable. We've discussed other videos where that isn't necessarily the case. That is not the key thing that is going to necessarily make you the best runner. Yes, perhaps some of the most elite runners are more forefoot strikers, and that has a lot to do with more rhythm and muscle recruitment and. The other side of the coin here is that if you are a rear foot striker, things have been said that you're probably at more risk of injury. The science doesn't actually back that up. There isn't a lot of literature that says you will get injured if you rear foot strike. And so this is the key thing, and I think a lot of people then go, okay, well, I'm an average runner and I want to avoid injury, so let me change my gait from heel striking to forefoot striking. There has been some correlation between injury prevalence and some people who do heel strike. However, if you are an uninjured runner, there is no reason for you to try and change your running gait to go from a rear foot striker to a forefoot striker. In actual fact, by doing that, you are now going to be transitioning the loads with you. So if you're a rear foot striker, normally the load is on your knee, and now if you try and transition to a forefoot striker, you're actually putting a lot more load on your ankle, onto your foot, and onto your lower limb. And so really, I think this is about weighing up the risks. Are you putting yourself at risk if you're currently uninjured? Are you putting yourself at risk by rear foot striking? The risk then comes in if you want to transition to forefoot striking, you're probably putting yourself at risk of other injuries from that other change in load. And so we really need to weigh that up and look at other things that we can do. The science is very clear that before you dive down this rabbit hole of gait retraining and spending months and months and months trying to change from a rear foot strike to a forefoot strike, consider doing 2 to 3 times a week of strength sessions to really optimize the strength around the lower limb, optimize the strength around the foot so you're avoiding those injuries anyways. And if you are currently injured and your injury is being caused from this heel strike, because I think that's the key thing as well, is we can't just sort of say this is the reason. Go and check it with a health professional, make sure that is the cause of your injury, and then if your health professional says let's look at changing or transitioning from this rear foot strike to a forefoot strike, make sure you do that over a long, gradual, progressive period. It's not something that happens instantaneously. It takes months to get this right, and you have to manipulate the distance that you run, the intensity that you run, and the frequency that you run over a long period of time to really make sure that we get this right. But again, I would make sure that is done under the influence or the guidance of a health professional, and really, really important to make sure that you're doing some strength training at the same time to help that process along so that you're really preparing your body for the optimal loads.
As a general rule, your leaner, lighter, faster runners tend to be your mid to forefoot strikers, and your taller and bigger runners tend to be heel strikers. And as shoe technology has improved, more people have moved to heel striking because of the cushioning properties in shoes. Now, because most of the fast runners or elite runners run with a mid to forefoot strike, magazine articles, coaches have tended to push people into trying to move to forefoot and midfoot strikers. And there's also the assumption that because that forefoot to midfoot striking is part of the human shock absorption system, and if we were to run barefoot, most people will forefoot to midfoot strike, there's also a tendency for people to think that that also reduces injury risk. Shona's unpacked why that in fact is not true, and the literature does not show that there is a reduction in injury risk when we move from a heel strike to a midfoot or a forefoot strike. So in essence, who should be running with a midfoot and a forefoot strike? There's definitely a clear cut that very few heel strikers are making it to the elite level. So we have to assume that there is a performance benefit to being a mid to forefoot striker. However, after years of coaching, and in particular coaching at the elite end of triathlon sport and spending lots of time trying to fix athletes' running cadence and running form, what I've witnessed over and over again is that even with 18 months of very specific and targeted work to get people to run leaning more forward, to get people to run with more of a forefoot and a midfoot strike, that when we hit the real deep end of competition, they revert to type. and in slow motion video, as soon as those athletes are under stress, no matter how much work we've done, they always revert to what is fastest for them as an individual. And as a personal belief, what I have come to see over the years is that we all have very unique biomechanics, and as we train and train more, we tend towards the biomechanics that are most efficient for us and the lowest injury risk for us, and that doing some specific strength training around those biomechanical anomalies is the thing that's going to get you to your best running gait. You've heard all the pros and cons for looking at foot strike, but it doesn't start and end with foot strike. We need to take in the whole body when we are looking at running form. Watch the video and you can see how to improve your running form.